Okay, we're going to go through the 250. We're going to go through much of the ancient art, and then we'll move into primarily Western art. And we'll do this page by page from your slide list called the Big Review. Okay, so the Paleolithic period is 40,000 to 8,000 BCE. And in this time period, there were no examples, or at least ones that have survived, of written histories, written anything really. And that's what commonly defines Paleolithic, along with a lack of creation of cities and domestic agriculture, and a change in that there's a stratification of society. All those things sort of give us the Paleolithic period, although I will talk about a new documentary that questions the actual dating of the Paleolithic and Neolithic periods. So this first one is called the Apollo Stone, which really gets on my nerves, because why give something found in Africa a title from Western civilization, particularly the United States? And I would imagine that they're going to change this at some point, because this object, which was found underneath the floor of a cave in Namibia, which is in southern Africa, it's on the east southern coast. Well, it's on the east southern coast of the African continent. They believe it was made sometime between 25,300 years ago and 25,000 years ago. And recently, which I don't think is talked about in the materials from Smart History, at least I couldn't see it, really the oldest example of figurative cave art was found in Indonesia in 2021, way after they created the 250 in probably 2014, 2015. And they found this collection of images of pigs and humans in this island, or on this island that's closer to Australia. And the works are dated 49,200. And I did a little math, and that is 23,700 years of difference between the two. So I'm hoping that they'll change the Apollo's 11 stone out and then feature the works from Indonesia. Now, they do actually in the materials, and I think this is updated, since I've closely looked at the 250, they now have discovered in, again, southern Africa, rocks with geometric patterns that are 75,000 or 100,000 to 75,000 years old. So again, it seems like almost every year, a couple years, there's a new discovery of humans making works of art that go back further than what we typically talk about in the 250. Okay, so that's good. All right, then we're going to go to Luxco. Yeah, I've been mispronouncing it for a long time. It's the most famous, talked about Paleolithic period site, always talked about in art history classes. And a couple of interesting things about it would be that there's horses, deer, bison, even a rhino that are depicted on the cave walls. But largely, and this was not sort of talked about when I was in college in the 80s, largely, I think something like 75% of the bones are of reindeer. So there's this theory that Smart History talks about that there was some sort of shamanistic sort of process maybe going on, that they would make the images and then be successful in their hunt of those images. But that really has been disproven for many, many years. And because we don't have a written record from this culture in France, we'll probably never know. I mean, it's all theories, right? Okay. And then this one is fascinating. This one is the camelid sacrum in the shape of a canine found in Mexico. And basically the sacrum is the last part of your spine. And they took that and they drilled the holes, as you can see here in the front and then sort of more towards the back, to make it look like some sort of canine. And camelids are basically alpacas. Moving my story here. Alpacas, camels, and something else. So I think what makes it really interesting is it's a work of art made out of human bones. Probably more than anything else. Okay, now we're going to move to the Neolithic period. And we're first going to look at the Jade Kong. And this comes from an area in China and a civilization called the Langzhou. And it's in a river area that goes out into the Pacific. And they believe that now we're in a situation in which we are having agriculture, we're having domesticated animals, we're having a hierarchy, we're having artisans, a written, not yet a written language. Yeah, we're going to get to that later. But yeah, so they had time with agriculture to create these really beautiful objects. And maybe I just had forgotten this. The lines on the Jade Kong are not made by any sort of harder stone. There was no stone that was harder than jade. They're actually made from sand, rubbing sand into those areas. And what's interesting about the Smart Histories material is that there was really large examples of these works made out of jade that were pretty vertical, and so it's when you look at the Smart History stuff that you see that there is lots of examples of these works made out of jade, which shows a high level of artistry, which shows a high level of stratification of jobs. Okay, so I think I can still do this. It might just be for this page, but I put in some extra materials on some of these works. And so this, of course, is Stonehenge, made during the Neolithic period, 2500 to 1600 BCE, before the Common Era. And I have this example of this PBS documentary, Stone Age Temple of Mystery. And it's a temple that was built in the 9th century in present-day Turkey, which also had people actually living in it at some seasonal points. And so it really calls into question, well, was it just starting in 8,000 that the Neolithic period starts? Or was this temple in Turkey an example of a hybrid between Paleolithic and Neolithic period? And I really invite you to watch that documentary at some point. And then there's a new... so I've seen it before last summer, but I rediscovered it. There's this thing called BBC Times Stamp. And there's some new material on Stonehenge that you can find just take it to 7 minutes, 36 seconds. And it talks about some of the new discoveries with regards to Stonehenge. Okay. Okay, we're doing fine. Okay, now let's go next. Oh, I mean, everybody loves this object, so I had to put it in here. And in this section of ancient art, there's going to be things that I skip, just things that I like more than others. This is the Ambon stone found in Papua New Guinea. It is from 1500 BCE. They believe it's part of a pestle and mortar technology because the bottom is flat, and it's they talk about how I've always heard that it's actually for sure a anteater, but they also have some other theories out there, and it's just wonderful. I could imagine somebody having a stuffed doll of the Ambon stone. All right, now we're going to make the big jump. We're going to jump to the Near Eastern cultures that are very much talked about when we talk about the start of the Neolithic period. So we're also going to see some Egyptian art from the Old Kingdom, which is 2,700 to 2,190. So the White Temple is a ziggurat, and it's basically a pyramid with the top sort of cut off, is how a lot of people describe it. And it's from Iraq, and it's from the Sumerians, who are the first sort of civilization that we talk about with regards to the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley Kingdom, and it dates at 3,500 to 3,000. So this ziggurat is, again, telling us that there is an elite in the society, which is a characteristic of Neolithic, and there's workers, and the workers build these complexes, these temples, for the elite. Some of them could be political leaders. So yeah, there you go. What else did I want to say about? Yes. Okay, I think we're good. Yeah. All right. Let's go on. Oops. Okay, so this is one of the first real objects of the AP Art History exam when I started teaching in 2001 that was talked about a lot. And this is from Egypt, of course. And one thing that's mentioned quite a bit as of late by the College Board is to not have Egyptian art be your go-to examples on major essays and maybe even the small essays, because they find that a lot of students do that. And the more variety, the more unique your essays are, the better. So try and avoid Egypt if you can. But we still have to know something about it for the multiple choice. So this is the Palette of Narmer, and it had a function where you see the twisting of the two Um, Next, on the right side, is where they would put cosmetics, particularly black eyeliner, which would help you in the very sunny areas of present day Egypt. And on the left, and I didn't know that there was another theory out there about this, but it makes sense. On the left, it could either be, and I think this is the mainstay sort of theory, on the left could be the conquering of and uniting of Upper and Lower Egypt by the king. And there's a bird with a human right hand, which is kind of fun. But then there's also another theory that it might be the sun god going across the sky on a daily basis. And so I thought that was kind of interesting that there's now two theories out there about what's going on the left side of the Palette of Narmer. Okay, I didn't realize how little this, for some reason I wasn't familiar with the scale of the Seated Scribe, which is, what were we looking at? Yeah, Old Kingdom, 2620 to 2500. It's just a little bit smaller. It was found in a tomb. We don't know the actual person because which would be on the bottom. Square stone, but it was taken off and then put onto another one, so we'll never really know who this is. And the whole sort of point that I'm trying to get to with these two slides is that the lower class in Egypt would not be idealized. So he's got a tummy, so on and so forth, but the scribes were very much appreciated and admired because they could read and write, but they're not the pharaoh. So on the right is a work that you could see in Boston, believe it or not, and this is King Menkaure. And now they're saying that they're not so sure it's his wife. It's the queen. They think it actually might be his mother. And I also didn't really remember that it's an unfinished sculpture, particularly her feet and the right side of the sculpture are not complete. And then there's all sort of things going on with the headgear that's not completed on the pharaoh. But the main thing that I want you to look at is the fact that the pharaoh is very idealized in comparison to the scribe, and also the queen is also very idealized. So even at this point, we're looking at art that is showing the hierarchies in the culture through the style of the art, which I think is pretty interesting. Okay, this is the Standard of Ur. Gosh, I've been mispronouncing that one for a while. From the Royal Tomb of Ur in present-day Iraq, and it is another example of a Sumerian work. And one reason why this is so important is it shows the invention of registers. So you actually have a ground sort of layer of decoration and a separation of narratives between all of them. And so down below is actually a war scene. And then in the middle is more battle, I guess, yes. And then up top is the ruler looking at war captives on the right. And then it's his army on the left. And this is an early example, if not one of the first examples, of the ruler being bigger than everyone else. So through art and through scale, you're seeing messages being sort of relayed about who's in power, which is always a good thing to look at back in the day. Okay, and then this would be, of course, the Great Pyramids of Menkaure, Khafre, and Khufu, which is the only remaining example of the 7 great wonders of the world. And this is from which dynasty? Okay, yes. So 2550 to 2049. Now, I did put some stuff in here, some extra stuff. One of my favorite documentaries, which is a little bit old, it's like a couple years old, is Nova's Decoding the Great Pyramid. I think that's a great one. And then just for fun, I put in here BBC timestamp, Flip Everything You Thought You Knew About Pyramids. So some extra stuff there. So in the middle with Khafre's pyramid, you still see the limestone that was the final layer of the pyramids, and it was smooth, so you'd probably hurt yourself, but you could get on a gunny sack and go all the way down to the bottom because everything would be smooth. The limestone was taken off the middle and also left and right pyramids throughout history after the Egyptian Empire ended. And that's sort of an interesting sort of thing to talk about, that we have this whole idea of historical preservation, and the Egyptians just didn't feel that way. They were willing to take limestone off the pyramids to make some other temples or whatever it might be, maybe their houses. One thing that the Smart History talks about and that a lot of people know about is the fact that it's not just the pyramids, it's also a complex of temples and such that go to the Nile, all the way down to the Nile. So we're only seeing a little bit of the temple complexes of the pyramids. And of course, large part what's going on is that the pharaoh has this incredible amount of power to get off-season farmers to make these pyramids that would have taken years and years and years, and would have promoted the idea of the pharaoh being a god on earth, and once he's passed away, or she, then they would go somewhere and still be gods and goddesses. Okay, this is one of my faves. This is the Code of Hammurabi, and it comes from Iran, and it comes from the Babylonian civilization. And let's see. So there's 300 laws on this thing. I didn't realize that there was that many. And it's in 3 sections. The first section talks about, it's not about laws, it's about what's going on up top. And that's Hammurabi giving an offering to a god of justice who's sitting on top of mountains. And then the middle section would be what we would probably sort of already know, which is the laws of the Babylonians, which is a huge leap in civilization history. And yes, indeed, there is an eye for an eye on the stele. A stele is a large stone that's written upon, usually. And then what else? I can't remember what's going on down below. I think it's honoring Hammurabi, if I remember right. Okay, so yeah, 300 laws on the Babylonian Code of Hammurabi. All right, now we're making a pretty significant switch. We're going into the New Kingdom of Egypt, which is 1,522 to 1,069. And this is the temple of Amun-Re with the hypostyle hall, probably one of the most famous architectural structures in Egyptian history, no doubt. And so the actual hall was made in 1250 BCE, which we're going to see here on the left. One of the things to talk about is the fact that they stopped making the pyramids. I don't know. Somebody just threw down the tools and said, you know what, we're not doing these anymore. I don't know if that happened, but I mean, my imagination says it maybe happened. So instead of making man-made mountains, they made these halls and temples, and they invented this thing called the clerestory, which is an upper level of windows that brings light into the temple. And then on the right is the very famous, of course, mortuary temple of Hatshepsut. Like I always like to say, instead of building man-made mountains, they put the burial temple into an actual natural mountain. So that's kind of the flip of what's happening. And that's 1,473 to 1,458. Okay. So when I first started teaching art history, AP art history in 2001, another object that I just found absolutely fascinating was this stone squared palette, basically, of Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and the three daughters. And what we need to understand is that Akhenaten creates a huge revolution in really world history because he decides to change the religion away from a polytheistic religion to just having one god, Aten, the god of the sun. And what's interesting for art history students, of course, is that the rendering of the pharaoh changes. And so you have a prominent belly, you have spindly arms, you have an elongated head, which is really only the aesthetic of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. His son, Tutankhamun, somewhat continues that, but then once Tutankhamun dies at an early age, they go back to a polytheistic religion. They move the capital back to what had been established as the capital for many, many years. And so this whole idea of monotheism really starts with an Egyptian pharaoh, and we do think that it did influence Judaism, actually. And then onwards into other monotheistic religions such as Christianity and Islam. Okay, that's good. Oh, and then on the right side is the inner coffin of Tutankhamun. It's been to St. Paul a couple times, to the Science Museum, made of gold. The most recent theory is that he died from a chariot accident. And there's this one documentary I have that kind of goes through that idea. And then some of the parts of the coffin would indicate that it was made actually for someone else, not the inner gold mask, but parts otherwise, because they don't look like they're actually Tutankhamun, because his death was sudden and they weren't ready for it, and so on and so forth. Okay, here are Lamassus. Just looked up how to pronounce that. And they're a part of my favorite Near Eastern culture, which is the Assyrians. And they would have been at the gateways into the kingdom, and also the temple of where are we at? Yeah, of Sargon II. And this is also in modern day Iraq. And it's really part of the Neo-Assyrians, so a little bit later, 720 to 705. And they're massive. These are the examples in the Louvre. I believe there's also some examples at the Met Museum in New York City. And one of the things that's interesting about it that we've talked about before is the fact that it has 5 legs, because when you look at it from the side, you can't see the left forward leg. And so it's all about object permanence. And there's a theory from one of the guys talking on Smart History that, you're intimidated by these Lamassu because you see these, very grounded hoofs. And then when you go past, there's sort of movement, or as if the Lamassu are moving as you are moving into the structure, which I think is really kind of interesting. I kind of like that theory, actually. Okay, now we're going to move to Greek art. Okay, so some of you know that I was lucky enough to be in Athens in December of 2024, and we visited the Athenian Agora, but we also saw these sculptures in the Archaeological Museum in Athens. Kouros is what they're called on the left. And believe it or not, they're a little bit more naturalistic than early Kouros. And they have the left foot forward, which shows the influence of Egyptian sculptures, along with the fist to the side. And he has what's called the archaic smile, which was you always see it with archaic sculptures. That's the first time period of Greek sculptures. And yeah, that's 900 to 30. Well, no, Greek art would be 900 to 30 BCE. And then on the right, you have the Peplos Kori, which are the women's sculptures. And one of the things that you notice right away, of course, is that she has clothing on. And so the Greeks found the male physique more beautiful than the female. And that's incredibly rare in civilization history in the world. We only kind of see it again with neoclassicism, which is in the latter part of the 18th century and early part of the 19th century. She also has a smile. Now, the Smart History stuff talks about how they now think it's a goddess and not just an everyday woman, because they think that the left arm held a bow, which would indicate that she's a goddess. And they also think there's a structure above her head because there's a pole that goes through the head, which again would have indicated that she was a goddess. Okay, we did the first page. Yay. Okay, here we go. Page 2 of the Big Slide 250 review. So when you go into any major museum, you'll see Greek vases, or vases, as other people say. And I find them fascinating. I really like red figure. So how it goes is that it's first they created black figure, and that's when you put the slip onto the figures, and the background is left without slip, and then you have red figure, in which the background, in the negative space, it has slip, and the lines too. And I used to say that it's only mythology that's seen in with Athenian vases, but there's some other ones. There are some who have actual history being displayed on the vases. It's more rare, but what do we got here? Yeah, so we can see no, actually, it's the other side of the vase in which there's an Athenian. There are Athenian soldiers, and this part is actually a mythological tale of revenge. And yeah, so that's the vases. Okay. Now we're looking at some parts of the audience hall of Darius and Xerxes, who were leaders of the Persian Empire, and this is called Persepolis, which is also the name for two very famous graphic novels about the Islamic Revolution in 1979 in Iran. So yeah, present-day Iran is where Persepolis is located, and the Smart History documentary talks a lot about this capital and column. There was, I think, something like, what was it? 36 capitals that topped columns, and it made for a very high ceiling to the leader of the Persian Empire's throne room. And they talk about, and it's true, it must have just been an awesome sight to see these capitals that were made of animals. No look at all of Doric, Ionic, or Corinthian. And this is probably one of the most, if not the most, adored sites in present-day Iran as far as archaeology goes. Okay. And then you can see also the panels. There is relief sculpture of various different people, and then there's also obviously some writing as well. Okay, the Etruscans. I have it twice in here. The Etruscans, the ancient world's greatest untold story, just in case you didn't catch the title of the 11-minute documentary down below. And so, yeah, the San Francisco Museums of Fine Art, which is the De Young and the, what's the other one? I can't remember the other one's name. The Legion of Honor, have this new show on Etruscan art, which is super rare. And of course, one of the more interesting things about Etruscan art is instead of having figures in the pediment, the triangle of the Greek temple, they have the figures on top of the roof. And also they have 4 sides, walls, which makes for a porch. So that's how you can tell the difference between the Greek and Etruscan and Roman too. But the Roman would be lack of the sculptures on top. Now the sculptures are made of terracotta, so that gives you a little bit more of a differentiation of poses, because marble is very heavy and very difficult to put in various different poses with arms and legs. And the one that they're talking about here is of, if I remember right, Apollo, who is talking to a less than fully formed now sculpture of Hercules. And yeah, the things that you should remember about Etruscan are different temples and also terracotta sculptures. Okay, here is the spear bearer, Diryphorus. I just looked it up. It's in, I believe, 1988. That our sculpture comes to the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. Sometimes it's shown in a small domed area, but lately I think it's in the galleries. Okay, so this is an example of what's called high classical, and you can tell it's high classical because the person is very muscular, and I always say he's high on steroids. So with the archaic, we have the archaic smile, hands to the side, so on and so forth. And then you have early classical, which I don't have on the slide sheet, which is Cretios Boy, who's not in the 250, interestingly enough, because Cretios Boy is the first sculpture that we know that shows contrapposto, that weight shift. And then obviously the spear bearer here is showing that weight shift as well. And it's from 450 to 440 BCE. Okay, so this is the Acropolis, one of the most famous hillside archaeological spaces in the world. I've been there with my family. We were there in December of 2024, as I think I was mentioning before. It's a awe-inspiring site, no doubt about it. And I just got done reading. I just got done watching Nova's Birth of Democracy documentary that just came out a couple days ago. It's very interesting. I now know the origin of the word ostracized. I also have a better understanding of the fact that there was periods of oligarchs, there was periods of democracy, so on and so forth. There's actually an Olympian athlete who tried to take over the Athenian government. He didn't succeed. But and it's always talked about that democracy is with a small d because you had to be a male. You had to be of Athenian birth in order to vote or be a part of the democracy. So women were totally shut out, as well as anybody that was not born to Athenian parents. And I think I also had heard that was also maybe I'm not right with this, but the land owning was another sort of key to somebody being able to vote. And they voted in what's called the Agora, which is something else that I've been through. It's a beautiful area that's alongside the Acropolis. And now we're going to go to the Parthenon. Okay, so the Parthenon, maybe one of the most famous, if not the most famous, architectural structure in the history of the world. Built after the Greeks had defeated the Persian Empire. And it's in what's called the Doric order, which is a plain capital. And then up above are three lines. They're called triglyphs. And then meteps. Meteps have they have relief sculpture off a flat surface. And then, of course, you would have had the pediment sculptures as well, some of which are now, of course, in the British Museum. And in fact, down below is from the British Museum. That's part of the pediment sculpture stolen by Lord Elgin. They're called the Elgin marbles. I think they're going to come back to Greece at some point, because that museum, the Acropolis Museum, is just incredibly beautiful, and they're ready for the sculptures to come back. I think it's going to happen. Let's see what else. Inside, you have a full relief sculpture, so that's the Ionic order, interestingly enough. And then we don't have, of course, the sculpture of Athena, which would have been made out of gold and other precious materials, and at some point that was destroyed. Another thing you should know about Greek temples is that it wasn't like something like a mosque or a church. The public wasn't invited to go in. It was only the priests, and the public would generally have their gatherings outside the temples. Okay, this is the Temple of the Athena Nike, which was I was disappointed when we were in Athens. I couldn't get a postcard just of the Temple of Athena because it's my favorite building on the Acropolis. And it has definitely the Ionic order, so the scrolls at the top, and then it also has a continual frieze without any triglyphs. And then down below is actually, I kind of screwed it up. This is not from the Temple of Athena Nike. Instead, we should be looking at the woman adjusting her sandal. This one down below, the plague of the Ergostines, is actually a part of the Parthenon. Okay. All right, so I learned so much more about the Boxer as of late. So these are two examples of Hellenistic sculpture. And Hellenism, it denotes the influence of Alexander the Great and his conquering of Greece. And Hellenistic sculptures are the two things that I always think about. Is they're very melodramatic, which we totally have with the Nike of Samothrace on the left, and they also have wet drapery, which you can see here as well on the sculpture on the left. They talk about how she's a little bit sort of twisted, and that somewhat gives more drama to the sculpture itself. It's on the top of a ship, and the breeze is coming through the sculpture itself. Then on the right, you have a very unusual sculpture because he's sitting. You don't see that very often. And so on the right, you have the seated Boxer. And if you look up close to it, the nose is broken. There's some holes in his cheeks. Because, and I didn't know this before I re-looked at this video on Smart History, because they boxed and only boxed the face, not the whole body. So his body looks in fairly good shape, but the face was damaged through the process of boxing. Okay, so hold on a second. Sorry about that. We skipped over maybe maybe the computer was with me on this because it's the great altar of Zeus and Athena at Pergamon, and it's from present-day Turkey, Asia Minor, and it's really emphasized that it's chock full of melodrama, and wet drapery from the Hellenistic Greek style. And my whole thing is like, why is it in Germany? The whole darn altar is in a European country. It's another example of cultural looting. I wish the Germans would give it back, but they probably never will. Okay, now we're going to talk about Roman art. Okay, so here we go. So this is the House of Veti in Pompeii. Again, it's somewhere where I was either in early 25 or late 2024. And they talk a lot about the structure. And an interesting part of it is that there is actually a hole in the roof, and then the rainwater comes down and is collected sort of in the middle of the public area of the house. One thing that we noticed when we were in Pompeii is then you go into these smaller rooms where they actually lived, which would be to our right with this image. And we're talking about, with Roman art, 509 to 337. Okay. So, I've got another possible extra video for you. PBS's Empire, Rome in the First Century, Order from Chaos, and this sculpture right now is in the United States, and it's one that I've always appreciated. It's the head of a Roman patrician, and we're going to talk about the patricians in a second. So it's in the time period in which there was an incredible interest in realism, realistic modeling of the face of these Romans. And I was reading a little bit about it today, and it's linked to death masks and also some of the rituals involved with some of the ancestors, with some of the patrician families. And I just find it remarkable that you see, wrinkles. We just don't see that much of aging in the history of art, because they're usually idealizing these figures, but not true for what we see with some Roman bust sculptures. Okay, this is Augustus of Prima Porta. It's another one that I've always found an interest in. So if you were part of a patrician family, it was specifically three sort of backgrounds. One was that you were military hero, or at least had military aspects and some success. Also, patrician family is a political family, and then the last one is that. So you've got political family. Oh, you're also very wealthy. Now, what are some of the patrician families in American politics in the 20th century? Without a doubt, probably the one that is sort of the closest to this, I think, would be JFK and the Kennedy family. He was a war hero. They came from a lot of money. There's some interesting discussions about where that money came from, but we won't get into that. And also, they were a very political family. And in fact, you may know this, there was a brother of JFK's who was supposed to be eventually a presidential candidate, but he died in World War II. Similar to the fact that with the Bush family, who are totally patrician, it was Jeb who was supposed to be the candidate, and instead it was George W. Bush. But George Herbert Walker Bush in '88, when he ran for president, always showed this film of him being shot down by Japanese fighter planes and being picked up by a USA submarine. And somebody recorded it on film, and so that was shown quite a bit during that race. The Bushes obviously are very rich and very political. The father of George Herbert Walker was a senator. And then, of course, he was president, vice president. And then his son, George W., was president. And Jeb was, at some point, the governor of Florida. So very much a political family. Okay, the Colosseum. There's been so many different documentaries about the Colosseum as of late. We were there on Christmas Day, so it was closed, but you could really get a sense of the, incredibly large size of the Colosseum. And it's interesting to see that, sports stadiums still today, except for maybe U.S. Bank Stadium, are constructed in similar ways. So here are some of the things that the Romans invented. One would be concrete. That was really important for the creation of architectural structures in the Roman Empire. They also invented the arch, if that could be invented, I guess, in a way, or at least the arch as a supporting structure. And yeah, so there you have the Colosseum. Okay, this is, hold on a second. Yep, the Forum of Trajan. And the Forum in Roman Empire architecture was this wide open space. That was a big part of it. And it was a governing building, or was it in honor just of Trajan? I have to look that up. But yeah, so 106, 112. Now we're in CE. We've been in CE since Augustus Prima Porta. So we're in the Common Era now. We're out of the BCE, so we won't go backwards anymore. And then at the end of the Column of Trajan is the Column of Trajan, which I've always been a fan. We were walking near the Forum of Trajan, and it just kind of surprised us. It just kind of came out of nowhere in a way, and I saw some specific sites, particularly the Pantheon, which we're going to talk about next, that we designated as important for us to see, but we really just came across the Column of Trajan, which sadly doesn't have Trajan on top anymore. It's St. Peter. But anyways, so around the whole column, which is quite tall, are relief sculptures of Trajan being successful in his war with in an area of what would be called Romania today. But it's interesting that really it was 21% of these relief sculptures that decorate the column of Trajan are showing battle scenes. The other ones are showing you preparation for battle and so on and so forth. And it is something to behold for sure, the Column of Trajan. We definitely wanted to go to the Pantheon. It was a little bit late, so it was kind of getting dark or almost dark already. And you go in, and it's just this incredible dome that you read about forever. And then you go in there and you see it. And so the Pantheon denotes all or every. So it's a temple for all gods, which is a little bit different from the Greeks for sure. And then the other thing that they talk about a lot, of course, is the oculus, a hole that's in the middle of the dome. I was surprised by how in disrepair the outside exterior walls of the Pantheon. Very just rough, and it looks like it needs a little bit of repair. But anyways, yeah, if you're in Rome, you have to go see the Pantheon for sure. And it was not raining, so there was not water coming through the oculus. Okay, now we're going to make kind of a big switch. We're going to go to early Christian, 100 to 3rd century. And we're going to look at this, which I think we saw, but we didn't go in. It's Sandra Sabina. And the reason why they have this in the 250 is because it's a very early church, a very early Christian church, that shows the influence of Roman Empire, ironically, Roman Empire architecture, where it shows you the clear story, and then there's the big sort of hallway and the apse at the end with the half circle. And it's just one of these, don't reinvent the wheel sort of discussions. Ironically, the Christians had been so tortured and killed by the Roman Empire, and then after Constantine, it became the Holy Roman Empire, and they decided to use an architectural structure from this empire that had been killing them for many years. Okay, so this is San Vitale. It's in northeastern Italy. And it is a domed, centrally planned church. So it's different from the basilica that we just looked at. And inside is just a huge amount of mosaics with glass and other metal tesserae. And up above is Justinian, who was the leader of the Roman Eastern Empire, and he reconquered Ravenna, and he made sure that he was featured in these two huge mosaics at the back of the church. And one of the things that people always talk about is that it's an interesting example of just a really straightforward example of a ruler of a theocracy. So not only is he in charge of the political apparatus, but he's also in charge of the army to the left, and also the religion to the right, with a bishop and a couple of priests on the right. And then down below you have Theodora, who's the wife of Justinian, and they talk about just the incredible, beautiful Byzantine fashion that the women in the mosaic are wearing. And very famously, Theodora has a purple robe with the three wise men down below in decoration. So it's really emphasizing the power of the Eastern Roman Empire after conquering Ravenna. Okay, and then last but not least is another favorite of mine. This is Hagia Sophia. I saw it in the January of 1996. I flew with a friend to Istanbul, Turkey, and so originally Hagia Sophia was built in 532 and finished in 537, and it was a church built for the Justinian and his family to worship in, which seems kind of impossible, but true. And then the big story, of course, is that later in the 1400s, the Ottoman Empire takes over the city of Constantinople, changes the name to Istanbul, and puts minarets outside the church and makes the church into a mosque, where there are still images of Jesus because they did consider him a prophet, not the Messiah. And also there's images of other Christians, not that many, but and then there's these huge circular, I can't remember what you would call them, but they have Arabic writing in them, and some people think that you really can't understand Islam unless you can read Arabic. I learned that a long time ago in a teacher workshop in DC. They're roundels. They're very, very large, and yeah, that's Hagia Sophia. Okay, so we're done with the first 2 pages of the big review. I'll start on page 3 tomorrow, 3, 4, and probably 5. But I wanted to sort of cut it up a little bit. So this is basically Paleolithic period to the early Christian period is what we've covered in this particular lecture. Okay, we're done.